"The nurses here do not heal, they harvest." These were the final words scratched into a patient's journal at Blackwater State Hospital in the winter of 1878. 3 days later, Thomas McKenna found the man's body covered in lesions that had not existed the week before. But here's what will chill you to the bone. Those lesions formed a pattern, as if someone had deliberately painted disease across his flesh. What kind of place transforms healers into harbingers of death? What drives those sworn to preserve life to cultivate its destruction instead? Deep in the coal-scarred mountains of western Pennsylvania, where fog clings to valleys like the breath of the damned, stood a hospital that defied every principle of medicine. Blackwater State Hospital. The name alone should have been a warning. Built in 1871 on land that locals whispered was cursed, this Gothic monstrosity housed 500 souls, though calling them patients would be generous. They were specimens. The building itself seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. 3 stories of dark stone quarried from local mines, its narrow windows like vacant eyes staring into the wilderness. But it wasn't the architecture that made visitors' skin crawl. It was the sounds. Day and night, a symphony of suffering echoed from within those walls. Moans that seemed too deliberate, screams that cut off too suddenly, and underneath it all, something far more disturbing, the sound of laughter. Dr. Ezekiel Hartwell had founded this institution with a vision that would make your blood run cold. He believed that certain families, his family, possessed hereditary gifts that transcended conventional medicine. 3 generations of isolation in these Pennsylvania mountains had created something unnatural, something wrong. Every staff member shared the same twisted bloodline. His 3 brothers served as physicians, his wife and daughters as nurses, dozens of cousins filling every position from orderlies to administrators. Webbed fingers handled medical instruments, misaligned spines bent over patient beds, and those eyes, pale, unfocused eyes that never seemed to look at patients as human beings. But here's the question that should haunt your dreams. What happens when an entire family, twisted by generations of inbreeding, decides that healing isn't their true calling? The answer lies in a leather-bound journal hidden beneath medical supplies in the infirmary. Martha Hartwell, the chief nurse, had been documenting everything. Patient names crossed out and replaced with numbers, infection schedules written in clinical detail, and most chilling of all, mortality predictions with betting odds scrawled in the margins. Subject 247 responds well to typhoid introduction. Estimate 6 to 8 days until complete systemic failure. EH wagers on day 7. This wasn't medicine. This was systematic murder disguised as treatment, and it had been happening for 7 years. The fog that perpetually shrouded Blackwater wasn't just mountain mist. It was the accumulated breath of the dying, the final exhalations of hundreds of victims whose only crime was seeking help when they had nowhere else to turn. But one man, Thomas McKenna, would risk everything to expose the truth. His courage would ultimately bring down this house of horrors, not before revealing secrets so disturbing that several investigators required medical treatment just from witnessing the evidence. What would you do if you discovered that your healers were your executioners? Tell me in the comments. Would you find the courage to speak out? The daily rituals at Blackwater followed a rhythm that seemed normal, until you understood what you were really witnessing. Morning rounds began precisely at 6, led by Dr. Ezekiel Hartwell and his family of accomplices. But they weren't checking on patients, they were shopping for victims. Picture this: Martha Hartwell, her webbed fingers trailing across bedsheets, selecting who would receive the special treatment that day. Her pale eyes would linger on the weakest patients, the ones whose families had stopped visiting, the ones who wouldn't be missed. Can you imagine lying helpless while death itself evaluated your worth? The medication cart that rolled through the wards twice daily carried more than healing compounds. Hidden compartments contained vials of infected blood, pus scraped from festering wounds, and cultures of diseases so virulent that touching them meant certain death. The family had turned the very act of healing into an instrument of torture. But here's what makes your skin crawl. They enjoyed it. Patient testimonies described nurses humming while they administered deadly injections, physicians whistling cheerfully as they documented symptom progression. The Hartwells had found their calling, and it wasn't saving lives.
Ward 7 haunted the basement like a tomb for the living. 12 cells carved from mountain stone, each containing a bed and nothing else. The air down there carried the stench of infection and despair, a smell so thick you could taste it. But there was something else in that fetid atmosphere, the smell of fear, so concentrated it had become tangible. What drove someone to transform a place of healing into a charnel house? The answer lies in the Hartwell family's twisted philosophy. They genuinely believed they were conducting important research, cultivating diseases to create more potent strains. In their demented logic, each death brought them closer to understanding the fundamental nature of life itself. Dr. Jeremiah Hartwell maintained what he called his garden in the basement laboratory, glass containers where bacterial cultures grew like evil flowers. He would introduce samples from different patients, watching how diseases competed within the same host. His notes, written in code, described the process with the enthusiasm of a botanist discussing prize orchids. The kitchen staff, all family members, had perfected the art of contamination. Bread mixed with infected discharge. Soup prepared with water used to clean surgical instruments. Milk deliberately left sour in containers previously used to store infected specimens. Every meal was a potential death sentence, served with a smile. But perhaps the cruelest torture was psychological. Patients who complained about their worsening conditions were told their symptoms were imaginary. Those who insisted they were being harmed were labeled paranoid and subjected to treatments designed to break their sanity. The family had learned that destroying hope was even more effective than destroying the body. Think about this. How many patients lay in those beds knowing something was terribly wrong, but unable to convince anyone to believe them? How many died thinking they were insane rather than recognizing that they were being murdered? The isolation of Blackwater meant these horrors could continue unobserved. But in 1877, one patient's curiosity would crack open this nightmare and expose the truth. What's the most terrifying medical experience you've ever had? Share your story below. You might help someone else recognize the warning signs. Thomas McKenna never should have survived Blackwater State Hospital. A simple mining accident had crushed his leg, requiring basic medical treatment that should have healed within weeks. Instead, he found himself trapped in a nightmare that would test every ounce of his courage. Unlike the other patients, McKenna possessed something dangerous: literacy, and an unshakable curiosity about the patterns he observed around him. While others accepted their mysterious illnesses as cruel fate, McKenna began to notice the deliberate nature of their suffering. The breakthrough came during a sleepless night in September 1877. Pain from his slowly healing leg had driven him to search for laudanum in the infirmary, where he discovered Martha Hartwell's journal hidden beneath a stack of medical supplies. What he read by flickering candlelight changed everything. The entries were clinical, detached, describing patients as subjects and detailing procedures that defied medical ethics. But it was the betting system that revealed the true depths of their depravity. The family wagered on patient survival times like spectators at a horse race, with detailed odds calculated based on their experimental protocols. Subject 198 showing excellent response to combined typhoid and consumption introduction. MH predicts 9 days. JH wagers on 11. Winner takes next selection privilege. Selection privilege. They were taking turns choosing who would die next. McKenna faced an impossible choice. Confronting the Hartwells would mean immediate transfer to Ward 7, from which no patient had ever returned alive. But remaining silent meant watching more innocents die while he possessed the power to stop it. Drawing on reserves of courage he didn't know he possessed, McKenna began systematically documenting everything. Using scraps of paper smuggled from administrative offices, he recorded conversations, tracked which patients received which treatments, and mapped the progression of induced symptoms among his fellow sufferers. The most chilling discovery came when he realized the family's true innovation. They had learned to cultivate specific diseases in human hosts, treating patients' bodies as living laboratories for bacterial cultures. Each person became a breeding ground for more virulent strains. their suffering deliberately prolonged to maximize research opportunities. But McKenna wasn't working alone. Samuel Wright, a former telegraph operator, had also begun to suspect the truth. Together, they developed a plan to smuggle evidence out through a sympathetic laundry worker who made weekly deliveries to the facility. Their message reached Dr. Harrison Fletcher at Pittsburgh Medical College, who had been growing suspicious about Blackwater's unusually high mortality rates. Fletcher's investigation would ultimately bring state authorities to the hospital's door, but not before McKenna endured months of terror, knowing that discovery meant certain death. Picture yourself in McKenna's position, surrounded by people who view you as an experimental subject, watching friends disappear into Ward 7, knowing that any wrong move could expose your investigation. What kind of person finds the strength to continue fighting in such hopeless circumstances?
The answer would determine whether hundreds more would die, or whether one man's courage could bring down an empire built on systematic murder. Have you ever had to choose between your own safety and doing what's right? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. February 14th, 1878. Valentine's Day brought no love to Blackwater State Hospital, only justice wrapped in winter's bitter embrace. Attorney General Robert Pearson's caravan approached through morning fog so thick it seemed to swallow sound itself. The officials riding in those carriages had no idea they were about to witness scenes that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. Dr. Ezekiel Hartwell was reviewing patient charts when they arrived, his pale eyes showing no surprise at the unannounced inspection. Did he know this day would come? Had he prepared for it? Or did his madness make him believe his work was too important to be stopped? The basement laboratories revealed horrors that defied imagination. Mason jars lined wooden shelves like a grotesque library, each containing tissue samples carefully labeled with patient names and extraction dates. The smell of formaldehyde couldn't mask the underlying stench of decay and suffering that permeated every surface. But it was Ward 7 that broke even experienced investigators. 12 cells carved from mountain stone, each containing evidence of systematic torture disguised as medicine. The scratch marks on the walls told stories no human should have to hear. Desperate attempts to claw through solid rock, fingernails worn to bloody stumps by patients driven to madness by pain. The financial records revealed the true scope of their enterprise. The Hartwells had been selling infected specimens to medical schools across the country, marketing them as rare pathological samples for educational purposes. They had also received payments from pharmaceutical companies seeking to test experimental treatments on unwilling subjects. Can you imagine the conversations in those basement laboratories? Family members discussing human lives with the casual indifference of farmers evaluating livestock? The betting books showed they had turned mass murder into entertainment, with detailed odds calculated on patient survival times. Martha Hartwell's complete journals documented 6 years of systematic experimentation. 347 patients had entered Ward 7 since the hospital's opening. Only 23 had ever left alive. The mortality rate in that basement chamber approached 93%, making it one of the most lethal places in American history. The legal proceedings that followed were unprecedented. The prosecution presented evidence of systematic abuse affecting over 1,200 patients. Medical experts testified that the Hartwell family's treatments had no scientific basis whatsoever, revealing them as elaborate torture disguised as research. Dr. Ezekiel Hartwell's defense strategy centered on claims of legitimate medical research, arguing that his methods were simply misunderstood by contemporary physicians. His lawyers painted him as a visionary whose work would ultimately benefit humanity. But the journals destroyed that narrative, revealing clinical detachment and deliberate cruelty that contradicted any claims of noble purpose. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. Dr. Ezekiel Hartwell received death by hanging. His brothers got life imprisonment. Martha Hartwell and the other family members faced sentences ranging from 20 to 40 years in prison. But here's the question that should terrify you. How many other facilities like Blackwater existed in America's remote corners? How many similar horrors remain buried in forgotten archives, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover the truth? The site was demolished in 1882, but the questions it raised about medical authority and institutional power remain as relevant today as they were 150 years ago. Today, a simple stone marker stands where Blackwater State Hospital once loomed against the Pennsylvania sky. The inscription reads, "In memory of those who suffered, that others might learn the true meaning of healing." But stones cannot contain the echoes of what happened here.
Thomas McKenna survived his ordeal and spent the remainder of his life advocating for patient rights and medical oversight. He became living proof that sometimes one person's courage can tear down an empire built on systematic cruelty. But the nightmares never left him. Until his death in 1923, he would wake screaming about the sound of laughter echoing from Ward 7. The Blackwater scandal transformed American medical oversight. Pennsylvania became the first state to require unannounced inspections of all medical facilities. New laws mandated detailed record-keeping subject to regular state review. Medical schools revised their curricula to emphasize ethics and patient rights. Yet the most disturbing question remains unanswered. What darkness lies dormant in human nature, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge? The Hartwell family genuinely believed they were advancing medical science. Their isolation had created a moral blind spot so complete that they could torture innocents while convincing themselves they were heroes. This wasn't simple sadism. It was systematic self-deception elevated to institutional policy. Consider the implications. If an entire family could become so corrupted that they viewed human suffering as research material, what safeguards protect us from similar abuses today? Are we confident that our medical institutions couldn't harbor similar darkness hidden behind professional credentials and administrative bureaucracy? The fog still clings to those Pennsylvania mountains, though local residents claim it's thicker now than before. Some say you can still hear sounds carried on the wind, moans that seem too deliberate, screams that cut off too suddenly. But perhaps that's just imagination, the mind's attempt to process horrors too vast for human comprehension. What truly happened in those basement laboratories will never be fully known. The Hartwell family took their darkest secrets to the grave, leaving behind only fragments of evidence and the testimonies of traumatized survivors. But we know enough to understand that Blackwater represented something far more terrifying than individual madness. It was proof that systematic evil can flourish when power goes unchecked. The most chilling aspect of this story isn't the medical torture or the systematic murder. It's the realization that ordinary people, doctors, nurses, administrators, can become monsters when they lose sight of their moral obligations to those in their care. As you go about your daily life, remember Thomas McKenna's courage. Remember that sometimes the difference between civilization and barbarism depends on individuals willing to risk everything to expose the truth. Remember that healing requires not just medical knowledge, but moral courage. The darkness that consumed Blackwater State Hospital didn't die with the Hartwell family. It waits, patient and eternal, for the next opportunity to emerge from the shadows. What's your theory about how such horrors could remain hidden for so long? Have you ever encountered situations where institutions failed to protect the vulnerable? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice might be the one that prevents history from repeating itself. If this investigation into America's darkest medical secrets left you questioning what other horrors remain buried in our past, subscribe for more stories that history tried to forget. The truth, no matter how disturbing, must never be allowed to fade into silence.